Howdy y'all. Today I want to talk to y'all about a little something called hustle culture. There's been a growing and almost like addictive infatuation around the words productivity and hustling. Almost every elite and person of success seems to be regurgitating these words like an annoying parrot, relentlessly drilling the idea into the heads of their covetous followers who desire the amazing life they apparently have. There always seems to be a new hack or idea to manipulate every waking second to our advantage towards endless goals of fitness, business, wealth, happiness. And I'll admit that I adopted the same hustle culture mentality as pretty much everybody else has. Reaching maximum productivity almost felt satisfying and, in a way, virtuous. After all, the Lord calls us to be good stewards of all that we have, and our time is no exception. And furthermore, the data proves that hustling and bustling and just getting down to the grind does actually get you to where you desire to be. Spending all of your time and energy pursuing one thing usually ends up in you obtaining that thing, which is a good thing. We all want to accomplish our goals, right? But lying underneath this seemingly innocent and rather virtuous ideology lies some pretty surprising and negative effects that I think are beginning to come to fruition, especially in recent years. I'm going to be honest with you. At first, when I saw that the polls were falling in the favor of talking about this productivity culture crisis, I was actually very, very excited because it's something that's been on my heart for a long time. And after further pondering on the subject and really thinking about how I was going to articulate this to you guys, I became a little bit more cautious. Not because I don't want to discuss this, and I don't believe that it's an important subject, but actually the contrary, because I do really want to talk about this, and it is a super important subject. And I know that if you listen to this, and if you get this right, if you get this point right, you will find a lot more freedom in your life, and you can glorify God more fully in the things that you do. But if you get this wrong and you misunderstand the words that I'm saying, then it can really, really cause you to stumble and put you in a place that you don't want to be. So that is why I'm going to be very, very careful when I talk to you about this, and I hope that you really listen and hone in onto what I'm saying. Also, just be discerning, with everything that I say and anything that anybody says. Always be discerning in what you hear. This is just my take on it and my observations from what I see and from what I've seen in my own life. We're still at the intro of this video, and I'm about a quarter through this coffee. This culture of constantly go, 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 and constantly trying to get things done and maximizing our time to get the most out of every second seems like a good thing, but when we really begin to think about it, it produces a lot more harm than it does good. And you may ask, but what is so bad about encouraging people to work hard and be dedicated to what they do and desire to become the best in whatever they're doing? This was the same question that I asked myself, and now that I've really stepped back and take a look at the whole culture as a whole, I say, no, there's nothing wrong with encouraging hard work and encouraging dedication and desiring that all that we do be done to the best of our ability. But I've seen that there's a difference. There's a difference between wanting to be, honorable with our work unto the Lord, and then this idea of constantly having to be moving, going, hustling, and spending every waking second trying to fulfill these goals that in the end don't really matter all that much. Before I get any further though, I feel that it would be good to go ahead and define these two terms, hustle culture and hyperproductivity, so that we kind of are on the same page when I say these words or say these phrases. Hustle culture is a movement that's been around for decades, but it actually wasn't given a name until recent years. The idea behind it is basically that in order to do anything great or to make any great accomplishment, usually within your career, you must completely and utterly dedicate your entire life to that one thing, sparing nothing. Those who are participants in this sort of thinking and culture are usually seen as highly disciplined and highly competitive individuals, investing endless hours, becoming at the top in their profession. I remember when I was working for a large electrical company, this theme was before us every Monday at our meetings. Every week we would have to display our numbers on a big whiteboard for how much money we made the company the previous week. Those who worked the normal 40 to 45 hours and made an average amount of money were put to shame by those who invested 65, 75, 85 hours a week into getting these exuberant numbers. The company would strategically pit employees up against one another in a competition-like fashion, knowing that most men are driven by pride, glory, and money. They did this to such an extent that around 10 TVs were installed in both the offices and our material shop to display each person's ranking within the company solely based on sales. Now, this has nothing to do with my previous company. That's just a way that, businesses work. And they were just trying to be as strategic as possible. And I got to give credit to them. I mean, it worked. I would watch men who had families and all that sort of stuff who, would willingly not take time for vacation with their family or not take off weekends and work from 7 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night just so they could earn just a little bit more money to get in front of the guy who was ahead of them. Now, granted, there were a lot of other guys who did not fall into that, and they really did put a lot of emphasis on their families, and when it was time to go home, they were ready to go home. But I would not say that this was the majority. And I would be so bold as to say that everyone was influenced by it to one degree or another. But this is just one example of how hustle culture has kind of made its way into corporate America. Hyperproductivity, on the other hand, is not hustle culture, but usually they go hand in hand. Hyperproductivity is the attempt to get the most out of every second of life in order to obtain certain goals. This is usually embodied through, concrete schedules, rigorous deadlines, strategic routines, the like. And the motto is always consistency is king. Notice that I'm talking about hyperproductivity and not productivity alone. There is a difference. Productivity is a state of being productive. Hyperproductivity is the state of being productively productive, or in other words, hyperproductivity is just being productive for productivity's sake. In a nutshell, it's a busybody. After quitting my job to become self-employed, this mentality became almost like fundamental to me. I felt that a second unplanned was an hour completely wasted. So I got hooked on guys like Ali Abdaal, who seem to have been able to break the space-time continuum and gain extra hours to achieving their goals. And again, don't get me wrong, I don't think that his content is terrible or that his ideas are bad at all. A lot of his stuff has helped me, especially in recent times, trying to get everything figured out on how to be your own employer. But for me, at least, I saw this tendency to get addicted to it, to where I had to be productive every second of the day, or else I was, just flubbing off or being lazy. And I would say, as I think that a lot of you would say, is I think that we've taken this thing beyond what it was originally meant to do. Kind of an example of hyperproductivity in my own life is just recently, being on YouTube. One of the biggest themes that YouTube tries to push onto content creators is consistency. You need to have consistency. If you're not consistent, you'll lose your audience and you will upset your relationship with the algorithm. And a lot of these guys that I've watched on how to grow your channel have, repeatedly said quantity over quality, just push videos out. And I understand where they're coming from. Again, consistency is king. And so a lot of us get this feeling, and I know I have for myself, is just okay, well, then I have to push out content. I'm just going to have to keep pushing stuff out. No matter whether I like it or whether I don't like it, I've got to get it out. Because, obviously I want this thing to grow. And so in order to fulfill this crazy demand, of getting all these videos and stuff out, I would have to make these rigorous schedules and make sure that I did everything in a timely manner. So that way I would get everything that I needed to get done. Which, is wonderful. That's great. You need to have a drive, especially if you're going to own a business. You have to have a drive to push yourself, do things when you don't feel like doing it, and schedules and all of that sort of stuff are really good tools to help you stay on track and make sure that you're getting those things done because you don't have any higher up telling you what to do. The problem does not lie in schedules and in, being organized. But when this thing like consistency and staying on top of projects all of a sudden becomes, all right, my hands always have to be moving and I always have to be doing something, striving towards these goals every second of my life, that is breeding grounds for some very serious effects. And so hustle culture and hyperproductivity both have kind of like the same theme. My hands always have to continue moving. I always have to continue striving towards my goals. I always have to continue to be thinking about the next idea that is really going to push me forward in my career. I always need to be thinking about that next step to grabbing that next rung on the ladder, to the point where nothing else really matters. Like, that is your main goal, that is your main focus, and that is what you have to continue working towards. And everything else is distraction. Your family, your friends, your downtime, your reading time, your prayer time, like that is all just secondary to this main focus that you're trying to achieve, which is to be the top of your career. And that is completely different from being productive. But unfortunately, that has become the mentality of our modern culture. And because of this hustle and grind mentality, we're seeing a lot of negative effects come into play. And I would be so rash as to say that if this mentality doesn't crumble, society is going to crumble, because this is unsustainable, the way that people are working and neglecting everything else for the sake of making an extra dollar. Now that we understand what hustle culture is and the idea behind hyperproductivity, I think now would be a good time to discuss these negative effects that we're seeing. Now, all these effects that I'm fixing to talk about are not statistical, like they're not, scientifically proven. These are just observations that I've seen, one, in my own life, in my own personal life, and also just in the lives of others. And so I'm sure that there are plenty more things that I could cover, but these are just the ones that I have observed. The first effect I'll talk about is, I think that hustle culture really promotes this idea of mediocrity, which sounds crazy, right? The whole purpose of being productive and being hyper-productive and, getting down to the grindstone and, grinding away at whatever you're doing is to become the very best at what you're doing. But I think really underneath the surface, the opposite is actually true. And I'll give you an example. Let's go back to, my time on YouTube. YouTube suggests that you need to get at least one video out a week in order to keep your audience, and make sure that you're not losing your relationship with the algorithm. And so, as a creator, I produce one video every week. Whether that video is good or bad, I push it through because, I've got to have a good relationship with the algorithm or I'm just not going to grow. So thus I have to kind of create the schedule for myself to where I have to get everything done in a week. I have to come up with the idea. I have to then do all my research on the topic. And then I have to write the script. And then I have to film the video. Then I have to edit the video. Then I have to upload the video, then I have to create the thumbnail, then I have to create the title, which takes longer than you actually think. Then I have to upload the video, then I have to rewatch the video, make sure that there's nothing wrong with it, and then I also have to watch the analytics to make sure that it's doing good. And so all that has to be done within a week. Which, again, this is an example, and for me it's fine because, I am not actively working right now like this. I'm trying to make this into my job. But for most people, that's kind of a nightmare I can only imagine with a full-time job having to do that. And so, instead of spending more time on the quality of your video and making your video look really good and spot on and, make it something that you're proud of, you instead just post a, half-done video with kind of mediocre points that really don't make any sense or really don't hit home for people. Just for the sake of uploading a video. Even like TV shows and movies and stuff these days, like you can see that they're just like spitting this stuff out as fast as they possibly can, and thus the stories behind them and the work behind them is really, really suffering. And it's just mediocre garbage and nobody wants to watch it. And I think that is kind of like what these social media platforms are just kind of filled with these days, is just a bunch of half-done garbage. There's also this like addiction to getting projects done. But when you step back and look at it, what are you sacrificing? You're sacrificing quality work that you're proud of just to have another video out that you're not really that proud of. And this can translate to any sort of niche or whatever you're doing, at your current job, where it's more about getting the project done than getting the project done right. And so most of us aren't proud of our work anymore. And thus, a lot of the things that we do feel meaningless. It has really no impact on anybody's lives because it's just like everybody else's stuff. Another thing that hyperproductivity does is it kills creativity and critical thought. Because our hands always have to be moving, and idle hands are the devil's workshop, we never have a time to just sit down and think about things, think about why we're doing something. It allows for no time for observation and contemplation. We feel that if we're not always moving and not constantly working towards these goals, whether watching a video, learning something new, or reading a book, learning something new, or calling somebody and making sure that everything is good with your company, or all of those different things, that we are wasting our time. Nobody these days can just sit down and stare into space anymore. And as crazy as it sounds, I think that that's been super detrimental to our society, that nobody can be bored anymore. Like, it's almost a sin to be bored. A quick example is, back when I was, again, working for this electrical company, dispatch had sent me a text saying, hey, your tires are up for renewal. We need you to go and get the tires replaced on your van, and you can just kind of like sit up there and wait till it gets done, and then after it gets done, just contact us, and then we'll send you on your way to your next job. And so obviously I did that. When I got there, I submitted the vehicle. Everything was A-okay, so I went into the lobby, and there they had popcorn, snacks, and everything, and it was pretty bustling. Like, there was, I would say, between 25 and 30 people waiting for their cars to get done. So there was a TV on the left wall. On the right wall was kind of like snacks and all that sort of stuff, and in the middle there was a lobby type area where there was sitting space and all that, and there were moms and older people and all that sort of stuff just hanging around. And so there was still enough room to where there were seats and all that sort of stuff. So I found an open seat and sat down. And by that time I had already ditched my phone. I had switched to another phone, which I will be talking about later in a separate video, which I'm super excited to introduce you guys to. But I ditched my phone. So I had no means of entertaining myself other than the TV that set up on the wall, and that was playing an old car building show. And so I was able to just sit there and just, think and observe and just look around. And while I was sitting there just looking around, I noticed that there was not another human being that was just sitting there enjoying the moment, because who cares about getting their tires done? Every single person that I saw there was on their phone or watching the TV that was up on the screen. And so I sat, and it took a pretty long time. It was about a 2-hour wait, but about halfway into it, as I was sitting just looking around, just watching the different people come in and go out, and the different employees take people to their vehicles and all that sort of stuff, I noticed that there was an older couple on my right hand side that were kind of just standing there, and the older man, he was kind of like hunched back, and you could tell that he couldn't walk very well. And I looked around, and there were no empty seats. All the seats were taken up. So as a normal human being, I got up from my seat and asked the lady if they would like to sit down in that seat. She, almost surprised, was like, yes. She's like, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. My husband can't walk very well. And she was kind of like explaining that whole situation to me. And she was super appreciative and sat down. And I don't say any of this to, brag on myself. I wasn't doing anything spectacular. I would have done the exact same thing as the other people sitting there, had I had a phone and been distracted. But my point is not to bring, attention to myself, but rather to tell you that if I had a smartphone and I succumbed to the idea that if I'm not constantly doing something with my eyes and with my fingers and with my hands, that, sitting around observing things is wrong, I would have been on that phone and would have not even noticed them even come in, and would have never had the opportunity to give them the seat that I was sitting in. And so I've noticed that we miss so much when we're constantly distracted by being productive. And this idea of constantly having to be productive, constantly doing something, constantly have our minds on something, becomes this huge distraction from the ability to observe the world around us and to actually be a part of the society that we live in. We become disconnected from people who are sitting right next to us, because we feel like we constantly have to, send this email back to the client or call this interested customer or whatever the situation may be. And we miss the opportunity to be lights in a dark world. And another effect I think that we're all becoming very, very well acquainted with is this idea of burnout. Burnout happens when you work so hard towards one goal, again, sacrificing everything. We constantly spend all of our time, thoughts, actions on achieving this goal. And eventually it just wears you down to where you can't do it anymore. And I know, again, this is speaking from personal experience, when I was doing electrical work, like I was constantly working these 65, 75 hour work weeks, trying to climb this ladder that I had been working towards for a long time. I had this goal that I wanted to work 4 years under a general contractor, so that I could then get my license, so then I could turn around and open up my own business. And so I worked for 3 years, just, constantly working. And that's all I did for those 3 years, pretty much, was just work. Got the reps in, as my boss would say to do. And I got really good at what I did. I even became the top of the apprentices at that time. But I just got to the point where I just could not keep going forward. Like, I lost all motivation. And there were multiple factors that played into this. It wasn't just this, idea that I had to continue to hustle to obtain this goal that I was, wanting to achieve. But a big part of it was just, constantly doing that day in, day out, sometimes weekends, because they had a schedule to where sometimes we would have to work, Saturdays along with our normal work weeks. And so you were just constantly hustling, grinding, and it just really, really wears you down to the point to where you wake up in the morning and you're like, I just don't know if I can do this anymore. And you lose this sense of purpose and meaning, because that's all that you ever do. And I would see like my brother and my sister, who would constantly be learning new things and constantly trying out new avenues, while I was stuck just having to, do the same thing over and over. And I think that that's just the biggest problem with that was balance. Like, there was no balance in my life. Well, electrical was my life. And that's why so many people become so emotionally attached to their career. I see a lot of people who just break down at the thought of leaving their career, even though they dread it and they hate it, and their days are miserable. They just can't fathom the idea of leaving it, because they have found their identity in this thing, because they have dedicated so much time and effort and sweat and blood and tears into this career. So thus they continue to live in misery because they don't want to lose their identity. And thus a lot of people burn out. Now obviously there are some places where burnout is overused. Like people experience burnout because they did something 3 or 4 times. It's like, no, well, you're gonna have to put in work, and you're gonna have to put in effort. The burnout that I'm talking about is completely different from just being downright lazy, from just not being able to get yourself out of bed because you're just too lazy to do what needs to be done. And that's kind of like what I was alluding at the beginning. Is this is a very touchy subject, because a lot of people can take what I'm saying and say, okay, well, now I can be lazy. I can sit at home and do nothing, because that's, I need to embrace boredom, and I need to embrace this state of relaxation, and so thus I can, quit my job and sit at home and do things that I want to do, and that will give me the life that I desire. And that's not what I'm saying at all. Like, don't take any of this as saying, that give you a license to be lazy, because that's not it at all. You have to have a work ethic, and you have to work. God calls us to work. God called Adam to work before the fall, which goes to show that work was planned from the beginning. It was planned even in a perfect world. So we are called to work. But there's a difference between working for a living and living to work. We are not called to sacrifice our families for the sake of the corporate ladder. We are not called to be busy for the sake of doing something. Another idea that I see a lot of is this false perception of what productivity is. For example, many would say that working on your next YouTube video is productive, and I'd get praised for doing it, for sticking to it, and sticking to the grind, and making sure that I have one done every week. But then if I go and hang out with my family or take a walk outside and just enjoy the sunshine, then most people would scoff at that and say, you're being unproductive, you're not doing anything important, you're wasting time. But what they don't understand is that both are a means of productivity. Now, there is a balance between those two types of productivity. Work, but also relax, and learn how to relax, but also work. So they go hand in hand, they're inseparable. And the moment that you do separate them and lift one higher than the other, you put yourself at a real risk of either becoming lazy or becoming hyperproductive. Another effect that I've observed is multitasking. You can bring your productivity levels to the max, because now not only are you able to focus on one task, but you're able to focus on multiple tasks at one time and get so much more done. But really, when you stop and think about it, that's a ridiculous idea. There's no such thing as multitasking. Almost like a deceitful way of glorifying distractions. Just think about it. If I was to look at two things at one time, my eyes would be crossed and I would be focusing on nothing. This is true for our everyday lives. If we try to focus on two things at once, we're really focusing on nothing. And I think that's one of the reasons that the Lord puts in His Word that a servant cannot serve two masters, for he will either love one and hate the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. Man cannot serve God and mammon. This is because we're all built with a one-track mind, whether you're a woman or whether you're a man. I know that they say that women are capable of this thing, but I still think that that's a ridiculous idea. When people try to obtain this superpower called multitasking and they actually try it out for themselves, both things that they're doing end up becoming a mess because they're not focused on either. Or, one turns out really great and the other one not so much, because they really only were focused on one of those things. If you can prove me wrong on that aspect, then I'm open to change my mind. But every time that I've done it or seen people try to do it, it's either a false sense of multitasking, like it's really not multitasking, or it really ends badly. So again, just an observation of mine. And that, I think, is kind of a good segue into the next effect that I've observed, which is hustling and hyperproductivity focuses on consistency, results, and achievements, while true work and diligence focuses on perfecting the task at hand, no matter the time it takes. Which I think echoes a lot of what I said before, where I was talking about the example on YouTube, how there's just a lot of just mediocre work on there. Because people are trying to push out as much content as possible to get noticed by the algorithm. When in reality, if people would just step back and just focus on each project individually and try to make that project as best as possible, then I think that we would all be in a better place, because the creator would be proud of his work. The viewer would be proud of the time spent watching that video, because it was well researched, well planned out, and it was clearly articulated. I think that we would see also a lot more breakthroughs in creativity, and not just this mimicking of other people's works that were before us. You see all these different remakes of these old movies because nobody can come up with ideas anymore. We're all too mentally drained to think about anything new. And so we just try to put our own spin on something that's already been done. And that's another form of mediocrity, which can again lead to that sense of you don't belong, or you are of no importance, because you're really not investing anything. You're just regurgitating what other people have already done. And to kind of summarize, I think that this rise and grind life that we're so addicted to is really no life at all. Rather a drainer of it, usually without us even knowing or seeing. We work and work and work to become the very best and the top of our profession, and before we know it, we're rich and 85 with nothing to show in between besides a large retirement account. And this is a sad point to get to realize that you invested your entire life to building a company or building this reputation for yourself that in the end is meaningless. This idea of hustling consumed you so much that you hustled right past your life. Yes, you obtained the riches and you obtained the fame or whatever you were looking to obtain, but you sacrificed your entire life for it. Again, I want to reiterate that I am not saying that focusing on your work and trying to be the best, not for yourself's sake, but for the glorification of the Lord. I'm not saying that that is bad. We should try to be diligent and faithful workers as unto the Lord. But to put that in a godlike space is detrimental. Make sure that your work is done unto the Lord. Make sure that the work that you are doing is not to the sacrifice and to the detriment of your family. Because in the end, your family doesn't want lots of money. I mean, maybe some do, but if you have a good solid family, a good solid wife, and kids who love you, they don't love you for your money. They don't love you for your job. They don't love you for your career. They love you for you. They want you. And the time that you spend with them it way outweighs the monetary things that you give to them. So we've kind of taken a look at hustle culture and hyper productivity, and I'm sure that you're looking at it and saying, wow, this definitely is a problem in my life, and I can definitely see it in the world, and how do we change it? There are ways to combat this hustle culture mentality, and it will be difficult. But the first step is to acknowledge that this is a box that we've been put in, and a box that we should not be in, a box that the Lord never commanded us to be in, a box that is actually keeping us from God and from our families. And I'm going to give you kind of like 3 suggestions to kind of slowly make your way out of this mentality of hyperproductivity. Number 1, just stop watching productivity videos. If you feel like you need to create a new schedule or you need to change up a few things to help you with actually getting the things that need to be done, then go ahead and do it. But don't go and watch somebody else's video on how to do it better or how to do it or the best way to do it. Come up with it yourself, show a little bit of creativity and come up with a method that's going to help you the most. Step back from that, especially while we're trying to get or step away from this hustle culture mentality. I say number 2 is clarify your understanding of the word productive. We kind of went over this, but it's very important to realize that productivity is not limited to your career. Being productive is being present with your family, with your friends, reading books that you haven't had time to read, finally cleaning the kitchen that's been a mess for all this time, taking a walk outside and enjoying the world that the Lord has created, and taking time, just 30 minutes to an hour, just talking to Him and giving Him praise for where you are now and all that He has given you. Productivity is not just found in the great achievements that we're working towards. Productivity is found in the mundane things that don't necessarily seem productive, but are usually more productive than all this time and effort we're putting into these careers that we're chasing, and they're definitely worth a lot more. And 3, I think, is the most important point, is just embrace quiet. Embrace the art of doing nothing from time to time. Stop looking for ways to fill the empty gaps in your life. Just like that example of me sitting at the tire shop waiting for the tires to get changed. If you're in those situations that are extremely boring, embrace that time. Put yourself in that moment. Put yourself amongst those people that you're with, and stop looking for an escape. Put down the phone. Make it a point not to look at it, not to touch it. Don't pick up a magazine. Just sit and observe. Watch the world around you. Enjoy the present moment. Enjoy existence. It's just like the Bible says, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in it. There was a great wind, but the Lord was not in it. But He was in a small, still voice. And I think that tells us something. The God who created all things, both heaven and earth, heaven and hell, the good and the evil, who created all things, manifests Himself in a small, quiet, still voice. I know it's going to be hard. I know that your reflexes are to pick up that phone. It's almost like a cigarette addiction, to where, it's just this, that addiction to, putting something to your mouth. It's the same thing, putting something to your face, constantly, scrolling through things to make you feel like you're being productive. I know it's going to go completely against your nature to embrace the quiet and embrace the moment that you're in. But trust me, just try it. And that time, even though it doesn't seem like it in the moment, will become so much more valuable to you. You'll also probably notice through observation how many people don't actually do this. You'll be in a room of 30 people and realize that you're the only one who's not indulged in a screen. And to be honest with you, it's kind of freeing. And for those of you who, you recognize that the phone is just an Achilles heel for you, like it is just almost like an addictive drug and you just can't put it down. It's as the Lord says, if your right eye causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away from you. For it is better to get rid of one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. But thankfully, you don't have to do this alone, for I have already taken that track and have already completely discarded my smartphone. And there is actually a very, very good alternative that the Lord has allowed me to find, and I cannot wait to share with you next week. But until then, glorify Yahweh and burn the boxes. We'll see y'all next time.